It doesn't look like a problem at first. It looks like intelligence. It looks like awareness. It looks like depth. But here's what's disturbing. The same mind that helps her understand everything is the same mind that never lets her rest. And no one sees it happening, because on the outside she's calm, put together, thoughtful. But inside, it never stops. The replaying, the analyzing, the what-ifs stacked on top of what-ifs. And it gets worse, because she doesn't even realize when it started. It didn't begin with overthinking. It began with survival. A younger version of her learned something early. Pay attention or get hurt. Read the room or regret it. Think ahead or lose control. And just like that, thinking became protection. Not a skill, a shield, a weapon, a necessity. She became hyper-aware, not by choice, by conditioning, because somewhere in her past, there was unpredictability, emotional inconsistency, silence that felt dangerous, or reactions that felt explosive. And without realizing it, she adapted. She started scanning everything: tone, body language, energy shifts, tiny details most people ignore, because to her, those details meant something. They meant safety or danger. And here's where it quietly evolves into something else. Overthinking, but not the kind people joke about. Not "I can't choose what to eat" overthinking. No, this is deeper. This is psychological looping. She replays conversations hours later, days later, sometimes years later, analyzing what she said, what she didn't say, what she should have said, and what they might have meant. But here's the part most people miss. She's not trying to overthink. She's trying to feel safe. And that's the trap. Because her brain learned something powerful. If I think enough, I can prevent pain. If I analyze enough, I can control outcomes. If I prepare enough, I won't be blindsided. But reality doesn't work like that. And deep down, she knows it, which creates something even heavier. Internal conflict. Because one part of her says, "Relax, it's not that serious." But the other part whispers, "What if it is?" And that whisper always wins, because it sounds like protection, but it's actually fear. And it gets worse, because the world rewards her for it. People call her smart, perceptive, emotionally intelligent. She just gets things. She thinks deeply. She's mature. And those compliments, they reinforce the pattern. They make the overthinking feel justified, even necessary. But no one sees the cost. The sleepless nights, the mental exhaustion, the constant tension in her body, the inability to just be, because her brain never switches off. Even in silence, it's loud. Even in peace, it's scanning for disruption, because stillness feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar feels unsafe. And here's the hidden truth. Overthinking isn't about thinking too much. It's about feeling too much and not knowing where to put it. So it turns into thoughts, loops, patterns, mental simulations, because thoughts feel safer than emotions, controlled, structured, predictable. But emotions, they're messy, uncertain, uncontrollable, and that's terrifying. So instead of feeling, she thinks and thinks and thinks until she's exhausted, but never relieved, because thinking doesn't resolve emotional tension. It just delays it. And slowly, that delay becomes her lifestyle. Now watch what happens next. It starts affecting her relationships, but not in obvious ways, in subtle ones. She overanalyzes texts, reads between lines that don't exist, questions tone, timing, word choice, silence. And here's the dangerous part. She often creates problems that weren't there, not because she's dramatic, but because her brain is trained to detect threats, even imagined ones. So she starts asking herself, why did they say it like that? Why haven't they replied? Did I say something wrong? Are they losing interest? And suddenly, a simple interaction becomes a psychological puzzle, and she has to solve it, or she won't feel okay. But there is no solution, because the problem isn't external, it's internal. And this is where things begin to hurt, because she starts doubting herself. Her words, her actions, her presence. She replays moments, not to remember them, but to correct them, to rewrite them in her mind. And it never works, because the past doesn't change. But her mind doesn't accept that, so it keeps trying, again, and again, and again. This is the loop, and it's exhausting. But here's what makes it even heavier. She hides it well. She doesn't show the chaos inside. She appears composed, rational, even emotionally strong, because she learned early, don't be too much, don't be overwhelming, don't be difficult. So she keeps it in, all of it, the spirals, the doubts, the anxiety disguised as thinking. And instead of expressing it, she internalizes it, which makes it grow, quietly, constantly, relentlessly. And most people around her, they have no idea. They just see someone who thinks a lot. But thinking a lot is not the same as overthinking everything. One is curiosity, the other is survival. And survival doesn't rest. But here's where it gets even deeper. This pattern isn't random. It's learned. Just like in where a child adapts to emotional instability by becoming hyper-aware, overthinking becomes a way to manage unpredictability, to stay ahead, to stay safe, to stay in control. But that control is an illusion, and the more she chases it, the more trapped she becomes. Because life is unpredictable. People are unpredictable. Emotions are unpredictable. And no amount of thinking can fix that. But her brain hasn't caught up to that truth yet. So it keeps trying, keeps scanning, keeps analyzing, keeps preparing for something that may never happen. And that's the tragedy. She's living in constant preparation instead of actual experience. She's thinking about life instead of living it. And slowly, that creates a quiet disconnect from the present moment, from her body, from peace, because peace requires letting go. And letting go feels like losing control. And losing control feels like danger. So she holds on tighter to thoughts, to analysis, to mental simulations, even when they hurt her, even when they exhaust her, even when they isolate her, because they feel familiar, and familiar feels safe, even when it's painful. And this is where the identity starts to form. She becomes the overthinker, the one who always has something on her mind, the one who can't switch off. But that's not who she is. That's what she learned to become. There's a difference, a huge one, because if it was learned, can be unlearned. But most people never reach that point, because they think this is just how they are, permanent, unchangeable, fixed, and that belief keeps them stuck. So they keep overthinking, keep analyzing, keep exhausting themselves, without ever asking the real question, why? Why does my mind do this? Why can't I stop? Why does peace feel uncomfortable? Because the answer changes everything. Because the real reason is not what she thinks. She believes she overthinks because she cares too much, because she's detail-oriented, because she wants clarity. But that's not it. That's just the surface. Underneath all of that is fear, but not obvious fear. Not the kind that makes you run. The quiet kind. The kind that disguises itself as logic, as preparation, as just being careful. And here's what's unsettling. Her mind doesn't trust peace. Let that sink in. Peace feels suspicious. Calm feels temporary. Silence feels like something is about to go wrong. So what does she do? She fills the silence with thoughts, with scenarios, with analysis, because chaos is familiar, and familiar feels safe, even when it hurts. And this pattern, it doesn't just live in her mind, it shapes her identity. She becomes the one who anticipates everything, the one who prepares for every possible outcome, the one who just knows when something is off. But here's the twist. Sometimes nothing is off. But her brain doesn't accept that, because it was trained in an environment where nothing never really meant nothing. There was always something underneath. Tension, unspoken conflict, emotional instability. So now, even in healthy situations, her mind searches for hidden problems. And if it can't find one, creates one. Not intentionally, automatically. And that's the loop tightening. Because now she's not just reacting to reality, she's reacting to imagined threats. And they feel real, just as real. Her heart races, her chest tightens, her thoughts accelerate. And suddenly she's trying to solve something that doesn't even exist. But her body doesn't know that. Her nervous system doesn't know that. It just knows. We're not safe. And this is where overthinking becomes physical, not just mental. She feels it. In her chest, in her stomach, in the tension she carries without realizing. Because her mind and body are connected. And both are stuck in the same loop. Analyze, anticipate, prepare, repeat. No pause, no release, just constant movement. Inside. And it gets worse, because she starts confusing overthinking with intuition. This is one of the most dangerous parts. She thinks, I just have a gut feeling. I can sense something's wrong. I'm picking up on energy. But most of the time, it's not intuition. It's anxiety wearing a mask. And anxiety is convincing, feels urgent, important, necessary. So she listens to it, again, and again, and again, until it becomes her default voice. And slowly, she loses trust in herself. Not because she's wrong, but because she's overwhelmed. Too many thoughts, too many interpretations, too many possibilities, and no clear answer. So what does she do? She keeps thinking, hoping clarity will come. But clarity never comes through chaos, comes through stillness. And stillness is exactly what she avoids, without realizing it, because stillness forces her to feel. And feeling is what she's been avoiding this whole time. Now here's where it gets even deeper. Overthinking isn't just about fear of the future. It's also about unresolved past. Moments she didn't process, emotions she didn't express, pain she didn't have space to feel. So her mind tries to go back, to fix it, to understand it, to rewrite it. But as we saw in When the Mind Keeps Analyzing Instead of Experiencing, it disconnects from reality and starts living in interpretation instead of truth. And that's exactly what's happening here. She's not fully in the present. She's in her head, reconstructing, replaying, reimagining. And every time she does that, she reinforces the loop. Because the brain learns through repetition. The more you think a certain way, the stronger that pathway becomes, until it feels automatic, permanent, uncontrollable. But here's the hidden truth most people miss. Overthinking gives her a sense of identity. It makes her feel in control. It makes her feel prepared. It makes her feel like she's doing something, even when she's stuck. Because doing nothing feels like vulnerability, and vulnerability feels dangerous. So she keeps thinking, because thinking feels safer than not knowing. Even if it's exhausting, even if it's draining, even if it's slowly disconnecting her from life. And here's where the emotional cost becomes undeniable. She struggles to relax, even when everything is okay. She struggles to enjoy moments, because her mind is somewhere else. She struggles to trust people, because she's always analyzing their intentions. And she struggles to trust herself, because she can't tell which thoughts are real and which are fear. This creates something heavy, mental fatigue, but not the kind sleep fixes, the kind that follows her everywhere, because her mind never truly rests. Even when she's lying down, even when she's relaxing, even when she's alone, keeps going. And over time, this turns into emotional burnout. But here's the part that hurts the most. No one sees it, because she's functioning. She's showing up. She's handling things. She's fine. But inside, she's tired. Not physically, mentally, emotionally, deeply tired. And she doesn't even know how to explain it. Because how do you explain something that never stops? How do you describe a mind that won't be quiet? How do you ask for help when it's all happening inside you? So she stays silent and keeps thinking and keeps carrying it alone. Just like in Where Constant Giving Without Boundaries Leads to Internal Exhaustion, overthinking becomes a form of self-drain. She keeps giving energy to thoughts, to analysis, to imagined scenarios, without ever replenishing herself. And eventually, something starts to crack. Maybe it's irritability. Maybe it's sudden emotional overwhelm. Maybe it's withdrawing from people, or losing interest in things she once enjoyed, because her mind is overloaded, and it can't keep up anymore. But instead of stopping, she thinks harder, trying to fix the overwhelm with more thinking. And that's the final trap, trying to solve overthinking. By overthinking, it never works, because the solution is not in the mind. It's beyond it, but she hasn't learned that yet, so she keeps searching, inside the same place that's exhausting her, hoping one day it will finally give her peace. But it won't, not like this, because peace doesn't come from control, it comes from letting go. And letting go feels like the one thing she can't do. Yet, here's the part no one tells her. She doesn't actually want to think this much. She has to. That's the difference. Because somewhere deep inside, there's a belief she never questioned. If I stop thinking, something will go wrong. And that belief controls everything. Controls how she loves, how she reacts, how she rests, or more accurately, why she can't. Because rest requires surrender, and surrender feels like losing control, and losing control feels like the beginning of pain. So even when she's safe, even when nothing is wrong, her mind doesn't believe it. It stays alert, just in case something changes, just in case something breaks, just in case someone leaves. And this is where the deepest pattern reveals itself. Overthinking is not about the present. It's about preventing future pain based on past experiences. Let that sink in. She's not reacting to what is. She's reacting to what was and what could be. And that's why it feels so real. Because her brain is trying to protect her. But here's the truth. It's protecting her from things that are no longer happening. And it gets worse. Because the more she listens to these thoughts, the more her brain believes they're necessary. So it sends more. Louder, faster, more urgent, until her mind feels crowded, heavy, relentless. And this is where something subtle begins to break. Her relationship with reality. Because she's no longer just experiencing life. She's interpreting it, constantly. And interpretation is dangerous when it's driven by fear. Because fear distorts, it exaggerates, it fills in gaps with worst-case scenarios. So now, a delayed reply feels like rejection. A short response feels like distance. A change in tone feels like disinterest, even when none of it is true. And the scariest part? She knows she might be overthinking, but she still can't stop. Because what if she's right? That what if is the hook, keeps her stuck. Because it always leaves room for doubt, and doubt feeds the loop. Now here's where it becomes even more personal. This isn't just about thoughts. It's about identity. She has built a version of herself around being aware, around being prepared, around figuring things out. So if she stops overthinking, who is she? That question is uncomfortable, because it means letting go of a version of herself that once kept her safe. And that feels like loss, even if that version is exhausting her. So she holds on, even tighter, to the thoughts, to the analysis, to the patterns, because they feel like her. But they're not. They're just learned responses, adaptations, survival mechanisms that stayed too long. And here's the hidden truth. She doesn't need to think less. She needs to feel more. That's the shift. Because overthinking is what happens when emotions don't have a place to go. So they turn into thoughts, loop stories, endless mental noise. But when emotions are actually felt, they move, they pass, they release. And that's what she's been missing. Not control, release. Now this is where everything changes. Because once she realizes this, she starts seeing her thoughts differently. Not as truth, not as intuition, but as signals, indicators, clues pointing to something deeper: fear, insecurity, unprocessed emotion. And instead of chasing the thought, she starts asking, what am I actually feeling right now? And that question breaks the loop because it shifts her out of her mind and back into her body, back into the present, back into reality. And for the first time, she pauses, not to think, but to notice her breath, her tension, her emotions, and it feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable, even scary, because she's not used to being here, without the noise, without the analysis, without the constant mental movement. But here's what she slowly starts to realize. Nothing bad happens when she stops thinking. The world doesn't collapse. People don't suddenly disappear. Life doesn't fall apart. And that realization is powerful because it challenges the belief she's been living with. The belief that thinking equals safety. Now here's where the real transformation begins. She starts letting things be unresolved. Let that sink in. She stops needing immediate answers, stops needing to figure everything out, stops chasing closure in every situation. And that feels strange, because she's been wired to resolve everything, to understand everything, to make sense of everything. But life doesn't always make sense. People don't always make sense. And she's starting to accept that, not perfectly, but gradually. And with that acceptance, something shifts. The urgency fades, the pressure softens, the constant need to analyze starts loosening its grip, and in its place, something new begins to emerge. Trust, not in others, not in outcomes, in herself, in her ability to handle whatever comes, without needing to predict it, without needing to control it. And that's where freedom lives, not in knowing everything, but in being okay not knowing. And this is the part most people never reach, because it requires letting go of the illusion that overthinking protects you, when in reality, traps you. And once she sees that clearly, she can't unsee it. So she starts making small changes, not dramatic ones, subtle ones. She notices when she's spiraling and pauses. She feels the urge to analyze and lets it pass. She catches herself creating scenarios and gently returns to the present, again and again and again, not perfectly, but consistently. And slowly, the noise decreases, not completely, but enough for her to breathe, enough for her to feel, enough for her to experience life without constantly being in her head. And here's the final truth. She was never broken. She was conditioned. And conditioning can change, but only when it's seen, not judged, not fought, seen, understood, and released. Because at her core, she's not an overthinker. She's someone who learned to survive through thinking. And now, she's learning to live without it. And that changes everything.